For every book that is recommended on the Observers by a well-known photographer, we have a way to purchase the book, but we also have a way to see what the nearest library is. So you can actually click on every book's library button, and it automatically will tell you what the closest library is to you. That's a good little hack to really get to learn photo books that are just not, either they're out of print or they're very expensive.
That's Wesley, and together with his co-founder Paul, they have interviewed 50 of the most influential photographers living today and asked them which photography books has inspired their work the most. And we're going to hear all about that right now. All right, can you clap one time?
What we do with the Observers is we interview what we call visionary photographers about the photo books that most inspire their work. We also dig a little bit deeper and ask them about their process and stories where they were perhaps dealing with something difficult and how they overcame that. But photo books is our main focus. My co-founder Paul and I decided that photography books was going to be the focus of our project because we felt in today's very fast-moving world, it really helps everybody if they calm down a little bit, slow down a little bit, and what better tool to slow down and learn and get inspired than a photo book. We've done almost 60 interviews now with visionary photographers from all over the world and at different levels of their career, and the three photography books that have come up most are The Americans by Robert Frank, The Decisive Moment by Henri Bresson, and the Aperture Monograph by Diane Arbus. The first one, the Robert Frank Americans book, is iconic and was very revolutionary at the time because no one really took that many photos of normal people. It was usually about special people, because photography was newer and it was expensive, and so you would only take photos of the people that deserved it. Whereas Robert Frank traveled around the United States and took photos of normal people who were struggling or doing well, it doesn't really matter, and that was groundbreaking. And so if you look at so much photography of today, it really comes directly from The Americans by Robert Frank. And what's really cool is that Robert Frank he's Swiss, so he was a foreigner traveling in a country, which means he had a different viewpoint, different eye for like what was important in terms of what he would take photos of. The Decisive Moment by Henri Bresson is the Bible of photo books, if you will, and it's incredible, and there's a lot of writing in it, unlike most photo books. So it's very interesting for that place and time to hear or to read the thoughts of this iconic photographer who really established a certain kind of style with his Leicas and his 50mm lens in black and white, and the philosophy behind it, the philosophy of capturing what he calls the decisive moment. Although he's French, so he didn't call it the decisive moment, he called it something else, and he actually didn't like the English translation, but whatever. The idea that you're capturing a moment and that it's the moment, that really comes directly from Henri Bresson. And again, that's something that you see in many photos these days as well. And then the Diane Arbus book is also very unique. She was a very sensitive, emotional photographer, and she took pictures of what some people might call the misfits of society, people that were one way or the other didn't quite fit in. And she did that with a lot of grace and consideration for those people. And they're beautiful, very moving images, and I think you can definitely see the influence of that in many other photographers since then. What's really interesting is that there's a lot of, it's like a spider web of photography, right? So there's a lot of photographers that will recommend a book by one of their mentors, and then I might get to interview their mentor as well. So for example, Jamel Shabazz, who's one of my favorites, he's a street photographer in New York City, and he recommended a book called Spanish Harlem, which is an incredible book by Joseph Rodriguez. And Joseph Rodriguez was a mentor of his, who also is a mentor of Yvonne Venegas, who is a photographer that I interviewed here in Mexico City for our next season. So that's one example of like a link between two people that we've interviewed, Jamel and Joe Rodriguez. Another example is Cheryl Dunn, who is a filmmaker, and she made this super cool documentary called Everybody's Street. And she interviewed and showed the kind of like photo practice of 5 or 6 or maybe even more incredible street photographers. It's a must-watch for everyone that loves street photography. And I interviewed her, and she recommended the book Subway, which is an iconic book by Bruce Davidson about the New York City subway system. And, you know, it was very gritty and dark in the days that he was shooting it. Now it's all cleaned up. But then I got to also speak to Bruce Davidson, and he's, of course, a generation kind of older, and he went back to the classics like a Henri, Cartier, Bresson, Decisive Moment book. So it's very cool to kind of like get to see these generations referring to each other and recommending what came before, which I think is one of the strengths of photo books, the fact that you're studying history, the history of your craft.
And a good way of learning is you read a book that connects you to the next book. Because instead of having two separate dots,
right,
you have already connected one to the other.
Totally. When I was a young teenager and I got really into hip hop, one of my favorite things about it was reading the liner notes and seeing what they sampled. And that's how I learned about jazz. So I would listen to, let's say, a Tribe Called Quest album, and I was like, oh, what is this amazing horn? Where's that coming from? Oh, it's from a Herbie Hancock record. So let me go to the library and find the Herbie Hancock record and listen to that. And sometimes they would mention people. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like you said, like it's a web and it's all linked together. And it's really, it gives you context, right? You're not just looking at an image, you're looking at an image and what came before that image. Like, why is Jamel Shabazz, why is his work that way? Well, his mentor, one of his mentors was Joe Rodriguez. Let's go look at his work. It's kind of like he sampled, like a hip hop artist, Joe Rodriguez. And that's so cool to see that context. It's been incredible. It's an incredible experience to speak with these photographers. And really what Paul and I boiled our questions down to is one main question, which is, you inspire us. Who inspired you? And that's the question with which we frame the conversation of photo books. So it's like, hey, Elliott Erwitt, legendary photographer who is now in his 90s and did all this important work. Your books inspire us. Your work inspires us. But what was before that? What inspired you? And it's so much fun and so interesting and so inspiring to get to hear the answer to that question for all these photographers that we admire. It's also really nice to be surprised by certain things, like even these legends have had their moments of feeling insecure about what they're doing, or feeling like they don't know what they're doing, even though we're looking at them as our photographic heroes and our examples. So that's, I think, very motivating for people who are aspiring to be future legends, if you will, to know that it's okay to sometimes think like, oh, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore.
Probably a necessity.
It probably is a necessity. It probably is a necessity. One thing that comes up, there's a couple of things that come up frequently. One is the fact that all the people who have gone on to accomplish that much are just really passionate about the medium. They're not self-centered or only thinking about themselves. They're fans of the medium. They're fans of other photographers. They're fans of the art of photography, and that's really cool. You know, like they're kind of like young photographers, but just very accomplished. So in the same way that a kid might be excited about their hobby, these iconic photographers are still very excited about it, even if they're, due to age or whatever reason, aren't shooting that much anymore. So that's one thing that comes up, the fact that they're very passionate about the craft, the fact that they love talking about it and love reading about it in photo books. I also think one thing that comes up as well is the fact that they're positive about the future of photography for the most part. Not everybody. Some people are like, oh, it's not the same anymore because budgets are lower and magazines are smaller, et cetera, et cetera. But most photographers that we speak to are looking on the bright side of things. They see that more and more young photographers are picking up analog cameras, and they find that to be exciting. They see that more and more young photographers are doing daring work because you have the opportunity to publish it on the internet. So a lot of photographers are very positive about the future of photography. I'm lucky to have interviewed several of my personal heroes. I mean, Elliott Erwitt, I mentioned earlier, he's one of my top favorites. Mark Seliger is one of my top favorites. I interviewed him for our next season, so that's not out yet. Bruce Davidson, Kathy Ryan, who's a photo editor. She's a photographer also, but mostly known as a photo editor. I just super admire her, and it was a really amazing opportunity to sit down with her and ask her questions, and then pass on those lessons to our readers. So yeah, I mean, part of this project is so that I can meet these people.
It's an excuse to meet them.
Yeah. There was a book that was recommended to me by Bob at K&M, which is a famous photography store in New York City, and he said you have to get Photography. It's just called Photography by Barbara London and several other authors, and it's like the go-to textbook for many photo schools, and there's many editions. I think they're up to maybe like the 13th edition at this point, but he also gave me a tip. He said, don't buy the latest edition because they really haven't added that much new stuff that's important. He said, just get the 7th or 8th edition, and that's what I did. I got the 7th edition, and it goes through everything. It tells you basics of composition, it tells you about how to meter, it tells you like these kinds of lenses do this. It's super interesting, and it's a big book. It's like this big, thick, heavy, hard to travel with, but it covers everything, and it's super cool and super inspiring. Which book have I gone back to the most? Well, I really love when a photo book also has some stories of like how the photo came to be, which most photo books don't. And there's two that come to mind, one old and one new. The older one is by John Loengard, who was a longtime photo editor for Life magazine, which of course was a super important publication for photography. And he was also an amazing photographer. And he has a book called, I believe it's called Pictures Under Discussion. And it has the little Life magazine logo on it and everything, so it was, I guess, published by them. And it's incredible. It's all black and white, amazing photos. One page will be the photo, and the page next to it will be the story about the photo. And he goes into depth about, you know, what was difficult about getting this photo, or how he ended up in this remote location to take photos of these people, these loggers in, I think, Alaska, and he's standing on the wood and it's floating on the water. It's super cool. The photos are incredible, but the stories make it even better. And then there's a more recent book, which is the New York Times Magazine book, which was edited by Kathy Ryan, and it has photos by dozens of photographers. And it's gorgeous. It's a big fat book, and it has all these, I think it's maybe covers 30 years of New York Times Magazine photos, which are all incredible by all these amazing photographers. And it has little stories, this time mostly by the editors behind the photos, which is a little bit different and very cool. So it can be like, oh, we needed photos of this crisis in Venezuela, and this photographer was there, and this is how we got in touch with them. And it's kind of like a little bit of a behind the scenes of how these iconic photos ended up in the newspaper, or in the magazine in this case, and you know, what it took to get there. So both of those they're just great as coffee table books, where you can just like pick them up and go through them and be like, oh yeah, that's that photo, and that's how that came about. And I love that. It's super inspiring. A non-photography book that would make you a better photographer. The first one that comes to mind is John Berger's Ways of Seeing, which is a kind of a seminal text. And there's also actually a very cool 4-part, I think, BBC documentary series that you can watch, and kind of covers the same thing, same title as well. And when I watched that and read the book, it really changed the way I thought about taking photos, because he goes very in depth into the philosophy of seeing, which in the end, taking a photo is seeing a moment and capturing that moment for other people to see. So he talks not really about photography, he talks mostly about paintings and other forms of art, but it's the same for photography. So that to me was, that really made me think. It made me consider, oh, what's the role of female subjects in art? You know, traditionally speaking, they were only allowed to be the muse, which is not fair, you know. And so like to see him talk about that, and the transition from older ways of looking at art to the more sophisticated ways that he describes, was super influential for me, and I think for many people.
Yeah. Was he a photographer or a filmmaker or a
No,
painter?
He's a writer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a writer, but he's a television maker also. But I think predominantly you would consider him a writer. He wrote many books.
That's funny.
Yeah, very smart guy.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Well, I think what photography books can bring you as a photographer that the internet or Instagram doesn't really bring you is peace and quiet. You know, you can go sit in the garden or in your chair or lay in your bed with a book, with no distractions, with a print, because a print is very different from a screen display, right? It's a calmer way of looking at an image, and you can really get into the details of it when the image is this big versus on your phone it's this big.
And you cannot tap out.
You can't tap out. It's not about the immediate reaction like, oh, photo, okay, next photo. You have to really look at it. You can see, like, your eye can travel on the page. You can't really do that on the phone as easily, at least. So you can see, like, the first thing you see in a photo, which you would also see on your phone, is the subject and whatever the thing is that's going on. But then you can see all the other layers in a book. You can see, like, your eye can travel from the subject to, like, oh, but look at the background. Or you can really get into the composition and see, like, oh, look at these lines and, like, how they interact with each other. And, you know, on a phone, sometimes the image doesn't even stop moving. Now, how are you going to see the composition of an image if it doesn't stop moving? So I think the main thing that you can get from a book that you can't get from other ways of looking at images is calm down, take your time, really take it in. And again, the quality of a print is always going to be different and superior, in my opinion, to the image on the screen. I don't know, I think that maybe is an easy cop-out. I think you could say, like, oh, young people have a shorter attention span, but I don't actually think that's true. I think old people love photo books, young people love photo books. Maybe young people need to be introduced to photo books, you know, because of course it's more like Instagram and websites and stuff, which I love as well, but they're readily available on their phone and they may not even consider, if they haven't thought about it, to go look at a photo book. So that's what we try to do with Observers. We try to remind those who know and introduce those who might not know yet that photo books are important and you can really learn a lot from them if you're a photographer. Photo books are certainly not cheap. Some of them can be even $200, but you know, you can find good ones for $30 too, but that's still not cheap. But of course, we have the great institution of libraries. And I think that's another thing that maybe people need to be reminded of, because I had to be reminded of the fact that I can go to a library for free and look at books as much as I want for as long as I want. And that's a great way to get to study these books. And of course it's different. If you live in San Francisco, amazing library. If you live in a very small town, maybe not such an amazing library, but there'll still be something. So one thing that we really made sure about with the Observers is that we provide that kind of accessibility to books, because we realize it's expensive, and if you're a student, you know, that's just not going to happen. But for every book that is recommended on the Observers by a well-known photographer, we have a way to purchase the book, but we also have a way to see what the nearest library is. So you can actually click on every book's library button, and it automatically will tell you what the closest library is to you. So it's like a little system that we've devised through WorldCat, and so if you click on it in Paris, it'll show you the closest library in Paris with that book. But if you click on it in New York, it'll do the same, but closer to New York. So that's a good little hack to really get to learn photo books that are, you know, are just not, either they're out of print or they're very expensive.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't purchased this yet because it only just came out, but I really would like to have the Jack Davison photo book, which is called Photographs, because it's his first, and I think it'll be really special to have. I love people's first photography books, so it'll be special to have. I had to own the John Loengard book that I mentioned earlier, the Pictures Under Discussion, because it's, first of all, it's hard to find, so I couldn't always find it in a library, and it's small enough that I can carry it around. I think On Work by Annie Leibovitz is also a very special book. It's actually more, it goes through an earlier part of her career, like many years, both photos as well as a lot of text. And that's a really nice book to pick up once in a while. You know, like, it's great to read it in one way, but it's also great to pick up once in a while and kind of like go back to certain moments in her career. So yeah, there's certainly books that I would love to own, or that I do own because I felt I needed to. But it's, you know, if you can't own them, you have the library. You know, you can, it's not a must. I actually don't think you have to, I mean, it's not a novel. You don't have to read it from the front to the back, right? A photo book is something that you can keep going back to spend 15 minutes with it one day, maybe another 15 minutes the next day, maybe then you don't look at it for a month and then you get back to it and then you read the whole thing. I think that's also the duty of the editor of the photo book, to make it a captivating experience. There's good photo books and there's bad photo books. If it's good and you're the right person for that book, you're going to read the whole thing. And again, there's no rules. You don't have to read the whole thing in one go. So I think sometimes you just take one image from the photo book and really study it for 20 minutes and then go out and shoot with that in mind, So yeah, I don't think people should put too many rules on their own way of consuming images. The only dedicated, I do it as it goes, but the only dedicated time I have where I really take a few hours to look at photo books is when I go to the library. Part of the time that I've spent in San Francisco, for example, they have an incredible library for photo books. I would go there once a week and sit there for 3 hours, 4 hours, and just have a stack of books, classics that I had never seen, that I really wanted to study, and just sit there. And that's maybe not for everybody, that kind of experience, but I loved doing that. I loved taking notes and being like, oh wow, this portrait of this person by Richard Avedon, why is this so good? I'm emotionally responding to it. I love it, but why is it so good? And then trying to learn about what makes it special. It's a good question. I don't know, but I do know that whatever your passion is, reading about people you admire, whose work you admire, is only going to help. Is only going to make you have a richer kind of library of thoughts in your mind. Through reading books, we can learn from other people's experiences. We can learn from their mistakes, or we can gain knowledge on things that excited them when they were pursuing the same thing. So I think reading books is always important. It gives you a better perspective on the thing, whatever that may be, skateboarding, photography, movies, that you are passionate about. And Paul also likes to point out that reading can help you become a better leader in your field, because to be a leader, you have to be able to motivate and inspire people. And so you need to take in as much information and as much inspiration from other people who came before you, who've learned a lot more than you at this point have, and then you can share that. So I think, yeah, even as a skateboarder or a filmmaker or a furniture maker, I think it would really benefit to read books about that topic. And as a visual person, there's also other, there's movies to watch, there's podcasts to listen to. Dedicating a certain amount of time to studying your craft, whether it's books or other forms of media, I think can only help. I have a challenge for the viewers, something that I do myself quite a bit, and it's really fun, and combines photo books and something else that I love, which is self-assigning work rather than waiting for people to tell you what to shoot. So find a photo book that you really love. Let's just take Bruce Davidson's Subway as an example, and really take a look at it, take it in, think about what you love about it, and then give yourself an assignment to go shoot something that week inspired by that book. Now, there's limitations, of course. Like if you don't live in New York City, you can't go shoot the subways in New York City. However, you can shoot other types of public transportation in your city, or bike riders, or whatever it might be. It's about whatever it is that you get from that book that is inspiring to you. Maybe it's that you shoot mostly color and you love this black and white book, so you switch that week. I'm going to shoot black and white inspired by this incredible book by Richard Avedon, for example. So that would be my my parting words would be: give yourself that assignment inspired specifically by a photo book, and spend some time really taking in that photo book.
All right. Thank you, Wesley. It was a pleasure to have you on as my first guest and first interviewee.
I was happy to be here.
Any final words to the viewers watching at home? Okay, wait. The three most... It sounds like a video game, like...
Yeah. By the photographers that we've interviewed for the Observers are... Number 11.